Ready? Well, good morning, and thank you for joining me here today. Later this afternoon, I have the honor and privilege to introduce Bill 74, the Advanced Education Statutes Amendment Act, for debate in the Legislative Assembly. This legislation is a key part of Alberta's recovery plan to create jobs, diversify the economy, and strengthen the workforce with skilled workers in new areas in our changing economy. The bill will introduce a series of amendments to the Post-Secondary Learning Act and the Skilled Trades and Apprenticeship Education Act. These amendments will help continue the implementation of Alberta 2030 and respond to some stakeholder feedback. Before I get into the details of the new bill, I want to take a moment just to provide a little more detail around Alberta 2030. Developed through extensive consultation with students, post-secondary leaders, and others, Alberta 2030 is a 10-year strategy for our post-secondary system. In fact, this is the first time in over 15 years that Alberta has a comprehensive strategic direction for our adult learning system. The strategy is our roadmap, and today, Bill 74 helps us move a little closer to realizing the goals of Alberta 2030. As I mentioned earlier, Bill 74 makes a number of amendments to two pieces of legislation. Let me take a couple moments to walk you through those changes. Firstly, I'd like to start with the Post-Secondary Learning Act. The first change that will be made in the Post-Secondary Learning Act will be to update the Preamble to connect the legislation to Alberta 2030. This includes adding new clauses that reaffirm parity of esteem between apprenticeship learning and academic learning, and another clause will highlight the unique role our universities and colleges play in moving our society and economy forward through groundbreaking research and new discoveries. The second change will establish a new Strategic Advisory Council for the system. This will be known as the Minister's Advisory Council on Higher Education and Skills. This new council will focus on providing strategic advice on policy and guidance to government to create a stronger post-secondary system. To stay at the forefront, our post-secondary system must be nimble and continue to adapt to a changing environment. This new council will help ensure that our system is always moving forward. This new council will only act in an advisory capacity. Another change will move the authority to set apprenticeship tuition fees from the minister to the boards of governors of individual institutions. This will help our colleges and polytechnics respond to the costs of their apprenticeship programs and will also give more authority and autonomy to our universities and colleges. Bill 74 will also make some changes to the Skilled Trades and Apprenticeship Education Act. These changes respond to direct stakeholder feedback. You may recall that the Skilled Trades and Apprenticeship Education Act was recently passed in June, and during our ongoing consultations, these additional amendments were identified. The amendments will ensure that several key features of the Apprenticeship and Industry Training Act continue in the new legislation. The first amendment will allow wage rates for apprentices to continue to be defined in regulation. Apprentices are paid a percentage of a journey person's wage rate, which increases with each successful year of training. These changes will ensure that wage rates are specifically outlined in regulation. The second amendment will allow for apprentice-to-mentor ratios to also continue to be detailed in regulation. And the third amendment will correct overly prescriptive provisions within the Act that hamper our ability to expand the trades and that conflicts with other legislation. So in summary, Bill 74, the Advanced Education Statutes Amendment Act, is really about establishing a new legislative foundation for the future of post-secondary education in Alberta. It formalizes our new strategic direction and reflects our government's commitment to develop a highly skilled and competitive workforce, strengthen innovation and commercialization of research, and forge stronger relationships between employers and post-secondary institutions. Thank you for your time and attention today. I'm very happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Minister. We'll move to the floor for questions. Shalane, go ahead.
Yeah, Shailan Skolsky, CTV News. Minister, I'm just wondering the motivation around moving to allow schools and the polytechnics to set rates around tuition and fees, why that is happening, and if there will be any regulation or ceiling on those fees.
Sure. There will continue to be regulations around those fees, just as there are regulations around current tuition fees for non-apprenticeship programs, including a cap on tuition. That'll continue to remain in place for apprenticeship fees as well. The change reflects a move and a desire for the government to give more autonomy to post-secondary institutions. Also within Alberta 2030, we identified the importance of deconsolidating some of our largest institutions, which basically means completely decoupling them from government. So this is another step to giving them greater autonomy and independence.
Thank you, Shalane. Do you have a follow-up?
Yes. Just in outlining those 2030 goals, two of them focusing on improving accessibility and affordability for students. Is anything today aiming to do that?
Not today. As I mentioned, Bill 74 is making some amendments to create a new strategic advisory council and other pieces. Of course, we're continuing to look at other student aid vehicles that can be provided to students to help encourage more Albertans to pursue post-secondary education. But of course, those are actions that don't need to be detailed in legislation.
Thanks, Shalane. Do you have another?
Sure, if there's none on the phone yet.
Just
a little bit more in regards to matches. I guess just in terms of how those members will be appointed, kind of what kind of credentials they will have. And I think you had already mentioned this, but I guess what their role will be. You would have said strictly an advisory capacity.
Yeah, correct. It'll be strictly an advisory council. One of the things that I noted after stepping into the role about 2 years ago was that there wasn't a body or an entity that could provide very high-level strategic advice to the minister and to the government. This was contemplated in the past when the idea of Campus Alberta was developed. There was actually in legislation a Campus Alberta Strategic Directions Committee, which was supposed to help provide strategic direction for the sector, where it should go, what it should respond to, but it never worked. So we've been in, through Alberta 2030, we had extensive consultation with our presidents and students about why it didn't work, what could a new one look like, and we received some great feedback. So we'll be strictly advisory. The members will be appointed through ministerial order. And the competencies that we're looking for will be people who have a good understanding of the Alberta post-secondary sector at a strategic and system level, who can provide that very high level proactive strategic thinking for our system.
Thanks, Minister. We'll move to the phone lines now. Operator, can you please put through the first caller?
Janet French, CBC. Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. I'm curious about the status of performance-based funding. That was supposed to begin this year with one indicator in schools. I'm wondering if that did in fact go ahead, given everything that's going on with the pandemic, and what are the indicators that you're going to be tying funding to in 2022-23?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for that. An important question. Of course, as you mentioned, at the onset of the pandemic, we delayed the implementation of the performance-based funding model. It is in effect now, and very happy to report that we've signed investment management agreements with every single one of our post-secondary institutions. We've decided to to introduce it a little bit differently than originally anticipated. So this year, there's only one metric in the performance-based funding model that ties 5% of funding to performance. And that one metric is on work-integrated learning. Specifically, the proportion of programs that an institution has that have a work-integrated learning component to them. So we've sat down with each one of our universities and colleges, developed an agreed baseline as to where they're at, how many programs right now have a work-integrated learning component, and worked with them to discuss what reasonable targets look like and have developed those targets. To answer the second part of your question, we are currently in the process of discussing with our universities and colleges a 3-year investment management agreement, because you may recall that was the original vision, was to develop a 3-year investment management agreement to give our institutions some clarity about and predictability about future funding levels and what performance indicators will look like. So we're in talks right now with all of our colleges and universities about what those metrics should be, what the targets should look like. We haven't finalized anything yet. We're always open to ideas and happy to get more of their feedback along the way.
Thank you, Janet. Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, just looking for some clarity on how many metrics there would be. And I have an unrelated question about when you look at small business and the adjustments that they were expected to make to implement the restrictions exemption program, there were grants available to businesses who were adapting to these vaccine passport style expectations. Why are post-secondary institutions expected to absorb the additional costs of checking for proof or conducting any contact tracing during outbreaks?
Sure. To the first part of your question, we don't have a final number on the number of metrics yet, but I think the mindset I have, and I think others in our post-secondary system have the same kind of mindset, which is less is more. I think that if we have 30 different metrics, it'll make it incredibly complicated and difficult, not just from a reporting standpoint, but also for institutions to excel on all of those different 30 measures. So I think less is more. What the exact number is, I think we'll see that as we go through this over the next few months, having more discussion and engagement with our institutions. With respect to your question about restriction exemption program and funding, our institutions receive disproportionately higher levels of funding in comparison to other jurisdictions. I'm very happy to continue to work with them, and I've made it clear to all of our post-secondary institutions that both I and the government are available to assist them in any way that we can in the implementation of these vaccine programs at their institutions. We've provided over 320,000 rapid tests for many of our institutions, and if there's other ways that we can support and assist them, I'm always happy to do so.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, can you please put through the next caller?
Catherine Gregowski, Alberta Today.
Thanks for taking my question, Minister. So you spoke a little bit about who will make up this board, in that they have to have some knowledge of the post-secondary system, but I'm wondering if you could break that down further. Will there be industry representatives from both polytechnics and universities? Will there be student representatives? Who's going to be on this council?
Yeah, we haven't specified exactly to say that there must be 2 representatives from universities or 1 representative from industry. But I do believe that it is important that we have that cross-section, that we have student involvement, that we have industry involvement and post-secondary involvement. That's what's going to make this group actually work. And, as I mentioned, when we were talking throughout Alberta 2030 in our consultations about the Campus Alberta Strategic Directions Committee and what kind of went wrong, one of the things that I heard is that we didn't have varied voices. It was just entirely the post-secondary sector and the presidents of all of our universities and colleges. So one of the things that we're really aiming to see are diverse views and opinions on this, so that we can think about our post-secondary sector on a holistic basis, because of course what happens at our post-secondary institutions helps create a better society in terms of a lot of the research work that occurs, and also in terms of training and educational opportunities, helps to produce the workforce of the future. So I think we need a good mix of people that can bring some strong expertise to the advisory committee.
Thank you. Catherine, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, and so this high-level advice, I'm just wondering if you could get a little bit more specific about the level of the level of advice that you're going to be looking at. Are you looking at high-level strategy for those 6 goals outlined? Are they going to be getting into the minutia of how much tuition for each program? What programs should universities be offering? Like, what kind of advice will you be looking for?
No, I would not. I don't foresee the group getting into that kind of level of minutia, what programs institutions should be offering or anything of that nature. This is really intended to operate at a 50,000-foot level, to be able to offer advice to the minister of the day and say, you know, there's incredible growth or demand for micro-credentials, and we need to look at developing a provincial framework around micro-credentials and supporting that activity, or we need to look at more reskilling initiatives and help to provide that independent thinking to the minister. So it won't get get down into the weeds and some of those examples that you illustrated. I really think that the success of this body is to operate at a 50,000-foot level. And just quickly on that point, you know, as I mentioned earlier, Alberta 2030 is the first strategic plan in post-secondary in 15 years. You know, and it'll change and it'll adapt over the course of the next 10 years, as it should. But we, as that plan, as Alberta 2030 comes to be concluded, there should be people around the table thinking about the next strategic plan and continuing to think in that kind of long-term fashion. And that's what the new council will be tasked with doing, is continuing to think at that at a high level strategic level.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, can you please put through our last caller?
Eva Ferguson, Post Media.
Yes, thank you. I'm hoping the minister can respond to a press release sent out yesterday by the Confederation of Alberta Faculty Associations and their concerns around the minister's response to their letter about COVID safety protocols. They say that the minister gave them misinformation and information that's out of date. First of all, claiming that no institution will be implementing mandatory vaccine mandates and that mask mandates will end on September 27th. I'm wondering if you can respond to their concerns, Minister.
Well, I haven't seen that press release. But I did see another letter from them. I think there was just a lag in timing, as tends to happen, and things move and change quickly. That when we had sent our initial response, by the time it was sent and received, things had changed. So there's of course no deliberate attempt to provide any kind of misinformation. I meet regularly with that organization, and happy to always make myself available to them. I don't believe I've had a request to connect with them recently, but if we have, I'm always available to do so. And again, I think it's just a matter of, the lag sometimes in time before when something is drafted and then sent out, and again, how quickly things are changing in this dynamic time.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, can you please put through our final caller?
Tom Johnson, Globe and Mail.
Good morning, Minister, and thank you for your time. For the last couple of years, Statistics Canada has noted that Alberta universities collectively raised tuition more than any other provinces across the country, with some program fees being raised by double-digit percentages, and making it more difficult for many students to either begin or continue their studies. Is there a possibility that universities will be hiking fees once again next year? And how will the provincial government address this issue, in addition to the proposals that are being worked out between some of the universities and their students?
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, at the end of the day, the individual board of governors of our institutions are the ones who set tuition rates. So it's up to them to make that decision. We provide a very high-level box in terms of a cap of what tuition should look like. But the government, of course, doesn't dictate to institutions about whether or not they should raise tuition or not, or by how much. That's up to each individual Board of Governors. But one thing I will say, just quickly on the tuition side, I think it's important to note that tuition right now in Alberta, as we speak, is comparable to that of British Columbia. The average tuition rates are probably a few dollars off between Alberta and British Columbia, and we're still quite below the national average. So I think it's important just to provide that context about where we are with respect to other provinces and national averages. But as well, we have also, over the course of the past 2 years, provided more in terms of student financial assistance to help students. We've created new scholarships, for example, and continued to fund growth in cost pressures and growth in many popular scholarships to continue to ensure that all Albertans have the financial assistance that they need to pursue post-secondary education.
Thank you. Tom, do you have a follow-up?
I do have another question, and that being kind of going off what the minister said about additional grants being available, and that being, will there be any additional grants available to other students who do not meet certain criteria? So in this case, part-time students.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, and I'm taking a close look with my team at our student aid offering, just to make sure that it's providing the resources that learners need. Because I think the demographic and dynamic of the learner is changing, and especially now as we're working to restart the economy. We have more adult learners looking at post-secondary education, part-time students, as you mentioned. So I think now is a good opportunity to take a look at what are we offering from a student aid perspective. Are there areas where we might be able to improve things a little bit more? So we have to do that work before we can come back with any more concrete ideas and solutions.
All right. Thank you, everyone. That concludes our time for today. Appreciate everyone coming out. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.